The corridor was cloaked in near darkness. The only light, the faint flicker of emergency bulbs casting long shadows on cracked walls. Mark's footsteps echoed softly as he approached the community center. A place once bustling with neighbors, but now eerily silent except for the low hum of backup generators struggling to keep some semblance of power alive. He moved cautiously, senses heightened, every creak and distant noise sharpening his alertness. He'd noticed her before Alana was, just a little off from the rest. Her eyes sharper, movements less mechanical. Tonight, something pulled him toward her, a feeling that beneath the surface of scripted behavior, there was a flicker of resistance. He found her leaning against the wall near the entrance, her dark eyes scanning the hallway as if expecting someone or something. She straightened as he approached, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before settling into guarded acceptance. "You're Mark, right? The one asking questions," she said, softly, voice low enough to blend with the ambient noises. "Yeah," he replied, cautious. "And you, Alina," she answered, glancing over her shoulder. "I don't know how much time we have." Mark felt the weight of those words. Time always fleeting here, in Edenview's shadowed grasp. "I've seen it," she whispered. "The patterns, the scripts. We're not just trapped by gates or power outages. Someone's pulling strings, controlling what we say, what we do." He swallowed hard. This wasn't just paranoia. It was confirmation of his darkest fears. "How?" he asked. Alina's eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and defiance. "The smart system, it's more than automation. It's a network, a web of control woven into every sensor, every camera, every device. The blackout wasn't an accident. It was a trigger." She pulled a small device from her coat, a makeshift scanner humming with faint blue light. "I've been trying to decode the signals. There's encrypted data embedded in the infrastructure, commands running beneath the surface. It's like we're puppets, and Edenview is the stage." Mark's mind raced. The implications were chilling. If true, they were part of an experiment far beyond anything he'd imagined. Why? Who would do this? Alina shook her head. "That's what I'm trying to find out. But whoever it is, they're still watching." Suddenly, a soft click echoed nearby. Both froze. "We're not alone," Alina whispered, grabbing Mark's arm. Together, they slipped into a side room, hearts pounding in unison. From the cracked window, they peered into the control room beyond. Screens flickered erratically, some displaying lines of indecipherable code, others static or looping images of empty streets. A shadow moved behind the glass, a figure monitoring the feeds, unaware of their presence. "That's our puppeteer," Mark muttered. Alina nodded grimly. "And we're the marionettes, struggling to cut the strings." Their whispered conversation was cut short by the distant sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, an enforcer patrolling the halls to maintain the eerie order. Mark and Alina pressed themselves into a shadowed alcove, breaths shallow, muscles tense. The enforcer's silhouette passed, the danger palpable. When the footsteps faded, they exchanged a look, fear mixed with determination. "We have to expose this," Mark said, "but we need allies." Alina hesitated, then nodded, one step at a time. "But we're already marked." As they slipped away into the darkness, Mark felt the heavy weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Edenview was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a cage, a stage for a sinister show of control. And he was determined to rewrite the script. The night pressed in around them, thick with secrets and silent threats. But, within Mark, a spark of rebellion flickered, one that refused to be extinguished. What lay ahead was uncertain, But surrender was no longer an option. We break the script, he vowed quietly, or we become its prisoners forever. Outside, the community remained motionless, the echoes of control whispering through the empty streets. But inside Mark, the first true resistance was awakening. The question lingered in the stale air. How deep did the puppeteers reach, extend, and who would dare to cut the strings first? The answers, Mark knew, were hidden in the shadows of Edenview's dark heart, waiting to be uncovered. He glanced back once more, the faint glow of the emergency lights reflecting in Elena's determined eyes. Together, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to challenge the silence and the control it masked. But as the night deepened, so did the danger, because, in Edenview, the Watchers never truly slept. And neither would they. The blackout had transformed Edenview into a silent stage where every resident moved like clockwork, repeating the same phrases, the same steps, day after day. From his porch, Mark watched Mrs. Caldwell, the elderly woman down the street, trace the same route through her front yard and back, her voice a monotone murmur of greetings that never varied. It was unnerving, like watching a dull wound to perform a single task endlessly. Mark clenched his jaw. This had to end. Inside the dim confines of their home, the stale air felt heavier than ever. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes glued to a flickering cartoon on the tablet, one of the few devices still functional without power. Suddenly, Eli burst into a loud, genuine laugh. The sound cracked the oppressive silence like a hammer to glass. Mark looked up, startled, meeting his son's wide-eyed gaze. For a moment, hope flickered. Encouraged, Mark stepped outside and headed toward the cluster of neighbors gathered as though rehearsing an invisible script. He interrupted their synchronized greetings with a sharp, unexpected comment about the weather. Heads jerked sharply, confusion rippling through the group. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes fluttered, momentarily disoriented. The spell was fragile but real. Later, near the dimly lit street corner, Tom approached Mark quietly, his voice a whisper. "You're not the only one seeing the cracks," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I remember how it used to be real conversations, real choices. Maybe we can get some of them back." Mark nodded, the weight of responsibility settling firmly on his shoulders. This was no longer just about survival, it was a fight to reclaim their humanity. As Eli tugged at his sleeve, eyes shining with innocent defiance, Mark knew the battle had only just begun. The patterns were breaking, one unpredictable moment at a time. The darkness of the community tech hub was nearly absolute, save for the pale, flickering glow of Mark's laptop screen. The hum of dormant servers surrounded him like ghosts, their silent presence a reminder of Edenview's once omnipresent, now crippled, intelligence. He sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, his fingers moving swiftly, methodically across the keys. Every line of code that appeared on the screen was a puzzle piece, a fragment of a digital labyrinth he was determined to navigate. Jacob's small frame appeared just beyond the threshold, his wide eyes reflecting the pale light as he clutched a flashlight with trembling hands. "Dad," he whispered, voice barely above the hum of electronics. Mark glanced up, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm here, buddy. Just a little longer." The boy nodded, retreating to the safety of the hallway. The flashlight's beam darting nervously across peeling paint and discarded cables. Mark's focus snapped back to the screen. The smart system's code was labyrinthine, layered with encryption that hinted at a sophistication far beyond ordinary security protocols. Yet, beneath the complexity, Mark sensed a pattern, a deliberate design meant to control, to manipulate. Hours passed. The quiet was punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of keys and the occasional muttered curse when a decryption attempt failed. Then, a soft click echoed in the doorway as Lara slipped inside, her presence a welcome intrusion. She was tense, eyes scanning the room as if expecting a trap to spring. "Mark," she whispered, stepping closer. "I found something. There's an embedded script, but it's different. It repeats, like a loop, but there are breaks. I think it's a backdoor, a failsafe coded into the system." Her voice was low, urgent. Mark's heart quickened. "Show me." Together, they leaned over the laptop, Lara pointing at strings of code that shimmered with encrypted symbols. With her guidance, Mark initiated a new decryption algorithm, fingers flying with renewed vigor. Suddenly, the screen flashed red. An alert, a system override attempt in progress. The servers around them hummed to life, a mechanical breath in the silence. Lines of code decrypted rapidly, revealing cryptic messages, coordinate data, procedural commands, references to a failsafe protocol. Mark's breath caught. This was what he'd been searching for, a crack in the system's iron grip. But the sudden activation also meant someone, or something, was watching. The risk of discovery was now dangerously high. "We have to move fast," Lara urged. "If they detect this, they'll shut us down for good." Mark nodded, determination hardening in his eyes. "For Jacob, for all of us. We can't let Edenview stay a prison." Outside, the gated community lay silent, but inside the tech hub, a flicker of hope ignited a chance to reclaim control, to break the scripted chains and restore freedom. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but Mark was ready to fight the shadows that held them captive. As the encrypted messages continued to unravel, so did the mystery of who was truly pulling the strings, and what it would cost to sever them. The blackout was no accident. Edenview was a grand experiment, and Mark was about to challenge its very foundation. The night deepened, but Mark's resolve burned brighter than ever. The hidden messages were a beacon in the darkness, guiding him toward a future where light might return to Edenview and freedom to its people. But the question lingered, heavy and haunting. Could they unlock the back door before the Watchers shut it forever? And with that thought, Mark plunged deeper into the code, knowing that every second counted, and every keystroke could be the one that changed everything. The story of Edenview was far from over. It was just beginning. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, but the darkness around Edenview was not softened by night's natural rhythms. Instead, it felt suffocating, a precipice abyss swallowing the high-tech facades that once gleamed with promise. Mark stood in his kitchen, the faint orange glow of a battery-powered lantern casting jittery shadows against the walls. His son, Eli, sat close by, eyes wide and unblinking as he watched his father sift through the dwindling food supplies. "How much longer, Dad?" Eli's voice was small, almost lost in the thick, stale air. Mark swallowed the lump forming in his throat and forced a smile. "As long as we can make it, buddy, we'll figure this out." But even as he spoke, the truth weighed on him like a stone sinking deep in water. The pantry shelves were bearing fast, the water reserve in their tank had dropped below half, and the automated delivery systems that once promised a seamless existence had gone silent. Edenview's smart infrastructure, once a marvel of convenience, was now a tomb of failed promises. He glanced out the window, where the silhouettes of other homes were barely visible, their smart lights long dead. The streets were eerily quiet, except for the distant murmurs that had become the new soundtrack of their lives, a mix of whispered fears, frustrated complaints, and the occasional sharp bark of a dog. Mark's mind raced back to the morning, recalling how quickly the community's fragile order had begun to unravel. When the power first went out, neighbors had attempted to rally, discussing plans and pooling resources. But as days passed, the veneer of civility cracked, revealing raw survival instincts. He remembered Mrs. Calhoun's pleading voice as she had knocked on his door earlier that afternoon, her frail frame shuddering in the sweltering heat. "Mark, please. The water's running out. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." He had given her what little they had left, but even that gesture felt like a drop in the ocean of their collective desperation. Outside, James, the community's security volunteer, patrolled the streets with a tense vigilance that unsettled Mark. The once friendly neighborhood watch had transformed into a force trying to hold back the tide of panic and aggression that rose with each passing hour. Mark knew that the breakdown of infrastructure was not just a technical failure, was a fracture in the community's soul. The smart systems that managed Edenview's every function had not just controlled lights and gates. They maintained a psychological order, a script of behavior that, when removed, left people unmoored and vulnerable. In the corner of the living room, Eli's small hands fiddled with a toy robot, his innocent movements a stark contrast to the growing chaos. Mark's protective instincts surged. He couldn't let his son lose hope, not now. "Let's get some rest," Mark said softly, guiding Eli toward their makeshift sleeping area. The air was thick and warm, the lack of air conditioning making every breath heavier. Eli's eyelids fluttered, but sleep was uneasy, filled with the shadows of uncertainty. Later, Mark stepped outside to survey the neighborhood. The streetlights were all dark, leaving only the pale glow of the moon and the faint ember of dying lanterns in windows. He saw groups of neighbors huddled together, some arguing over water rationing, others silently sharing food scraps. The community was holding on by a thread. A sudden shout broke the night's fragile silence as James intervened in a heated dispute. Mark's heart pounded. He knew this was just the beginning. The collapse that started with a power outage was now threatening the very fabric of Edenview. He returned to his home, placing a hand on Eli's sleeping shoulder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Mark resolved to meet them head-on. The blackout was more than a loss of light. It was a test of human endurance, of trust, and ultimately, of hope. As he sat back down, the weight of the unknown pressed down on him, but somewhere deep inside, a spark remained. They would survive. They had to. And somewhere, beyond the gates of Edenview, something was still watching. The night air in Edenview was thick with an unnerving silence that seemed to swallow every sound, every breath. I crouched behind the rusted frame of the old playground slide, the faint moonlight casting long shadows over the cracked concrete beneath me. Beside me, Lena's eyes darted nervously towards the darkened streets, her fingers tapping anxiously against the worn leather strap of her backpack. "They'll be watching," she whispered, voice low and urgent. "We have to be careful." I nodded, swallowing hard, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest. Since the blackout began, the neighborhood had transformed from a community of neighbors into something unrecognizable, a stage where people moved like puppets, their strings pulled by an unseen hand. But not all were lost to the script. I had seen it glimmers of resistance, flickers of doubt in their eyes. Lena was one. I hoped I could trust her. Our quiet meeting was abruptly shattered by the heavy thud of boots echoing down the street. I turned my head sharply, catching the silhouette of Gary, the man who had become the community's enforcer. His presence was a dark cloud, looming and oppressive. The cold glint in his eyes told me he wasn't just another neighbor caught in the blackout spell. He was an enforcer of the script, a living reminder of how thin the veneer of normalcy had become. Gary's footsteps stopped near a barricade, and I could see him scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of defiance. Terra, my son, was safely inside our home, but every minute I was away from him felt like a gamble. His innocent presence was my anchor, the fragile thread of hope that kept me pushing forward. I thought of him now as I watched a small group of neighbors huddle nearby, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. One of them was a young mother clutching her child tightly. Without thinking, I stepped out from the shadows, my voice soft but firm. "We're not alone," I said, offering a faint smile. The child's trembling hands relaxed slightly as Tara's. Words from earlier echoed in my mind the way he had comforted another frightened child just hours ago. That innocence was a weapon against the darkness. Returning to Lena's side, we crept towards the community center, now a fortress of flickering monitors and dead screens. She pulled out a small device, a homemade jammer we'd cobbled together from scavenged parts. "If we can disrupt the control signals, even for a few minutes, it might give us the edge we need," she said. Her fingers danced over the buttons, the soft humming of the machine a discordant melody against the night silence. Then, suddenly, a screen flickered to life grainy images of surveillance footage, revealing the patterns of movement imposed on the residents. The realization settled like a stone in my stomach. This wasn't random chaos. It was orchestrated, a cruel experiment in control. But the more we uncovered, the more dangerous our position became. Gary's patrols grew more frequent, his enforcers spreading through the streets like shadows hunting prey. Trust was a luxury we could no longer afford. Every whispered conversation carried the risk of betrayal. Yet, despite the fear, despite the ever-tightening noose of control, a spark of rebellion glowed within the community, and I was determined to fan it into a flame, no matter the cost. As the night deepened, I found myself standing on the edge of a new kind of war. One waged not with guns or fists, but with knowledge, trust, and the fragile hope of freedom. The lines between ally and enemy blurred, and every choice carried weighty consequences. But with Tara's voice in my heart and Lena's courage at my side, I was ready to fight for Edenview's soul. And the script, it was time to rewrite it. The night air hung heavy with an unnatural stillness as Mark, Jenna, and Luis approached the nondescript building at the heart of Edenview. It was a fortress in itself, surrounded by reinforced walls and locked gates that had long ceased functioning for the residents. Freedom, but now served as a bastion for the unknown forces behind the blackout. The emergency lights outside flickered erratically, casting eerie blue glows against the cold metal door. Mark's pulse quickened. This was the moment he had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. Jenna produced a slim device from her jacket pocket, her fingers dancing swiftly over the screen. "This should bypass the biometric lock for at least 5 minutes," she whispered, eyes scanning the keypad nervously. A soft beep confirmed the door release, and it swung open with a hesitant creak. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The hum of servers filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had engulfed the rest of the community. Rows upon rows of racks stood like sentinels of technology, their blinking lights painting the room with a cold, spectral glow. Mark's eyes darted around as he took in the sterile environment, the very core of Edenview's smart infrastructure. Luis moved cautiously ahead, his military training evident in the way he scanned each corridor and corner. "We don't know if there's any security left online," he muttered, voice low but firm. "Stay sharp." Jenna connected a portable terminal to one of the main servers, fingers flying over the keys as the screen illuminated with lines of indecipherable code. "I'm in," she announced, her voice steady despite the tension. "There's encrypted data everywhere. It's going to take some time to sift through." Mark paced slowly, his thoughts racing. The blackout had plunged Edenview into darkness, but now, illuminated by the harsh blue light, he could see clearly the machinery of control that had been operating silently beneath the surface. He moved toward a console displaying security footage. Blank screens flickered weakly, some frozen in eerie snapshots of neighbors repeating their scripted actions. Suddenly, Jenna's voice cut through the silence. "Mark, you need to see this." She pointed to a folder labeled Behavioral Logs. Mark's stomach tightened. As Jenna decrypted the files, audio recordings began playing fragmented conversations, directives issued in calm, emotionless tones, and evidence of deliberate manipulation. A chill ran down Mark's spine. This wasn't an accident or a malfunction. It was a premeditated experiment. Edenview was never just a community. It was a testing ground. "They recorded everything," Mark whispered. "Our movements, our words, our lives controlled like puppets." Before they could delve deeper, a shrill alarm shattered the room's quiet. Red lights flashed urgently. Louise grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward the exit. "We've been detected. They're locking down the hub. We don't have much time." Jenna frantically downloaded as much data as she could onto a portable drive, sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill. The hum of the servers grew louder, almost menacing, as if the building itself was waking to defend its secrets. They sprinted through the maze-like corridors, the emergency lights now dimming as the system attempted a full shutdown. Mark's mind raced. This data was their key, but escaping with it was paramount. Bursting through the entrance, the night air never felt so sweet. They were out, but the weight of what they had uncovered pressed heavily upon them. Edenview was a cage, and they had just glimpsed the puppeteer's strings. As they disappeared into the shadows, Mark's resolve hardened. He wasn't just fighting for his son or himself anymore. He was fighting to expose the truth behind Edenview's sinister facade. But who was behind it all? And what price would they pay for freedom? The answers lay ahead, in the dark heart of the community and beyond.